Rudolph Valentino. Rudolph Valentino was no stranger to mystery, but even in death he carried a secret, one that some believe sealed his fate. Buried alongside the silent film heartthrob was a ring, a seemingly innocuous piece of jewelry that had long been whispered about in Hollywood's shadowy corners. They called it the Ring of Destiny, but to those who knew its history it was something far more sinister, a cursed relic that had followed Valentino to the grave. The story began in the early 1920s when Valentino, already a megastar, stumbled upon the ring in a small Los Angeles shop. The jeweler reportedly warned him that the ring carried misfortune, but Valentino, drawn to its eerie design, ignored the caution. Almost immediately, his life took a downward turn. His films underperformed, critics turned against him, and his health began to deteriorate. By 1926, at just 31 years old, Valentino was gone, his sudden passing only fueling the legend of the cursed ring. But the story didn't end there. After his death, the ring resurfaced, passing through the hands of several owners, each of whom met with strange misfortune. Some fell into financial ruin, others suffered untimely deaths, and the myth of the ring only grew stronger. Whether it was coincidence or something more, the Ring of Destiny ensured that Valentino's legacy remained shrouded in intrigue, a final haunting chapter to the life of Hollywood's most enigmatic leading man. Bela Lugosi. In the end, Bela Lugosi and Dracula were inseparable, not just in life but in death. When the legendary horror actor passed in the mid-1950s, his family made a decision that ensured his legacy would live on in the most haunting way possible. Lugosi was buried in his iconic Dracula cape, the same flowing garment that had draped over his shoulders as he mesmerized audiences in the early 1930s. Despite years of struggling to break free from the shadow of the role, he ultimately embraced it, and his family honored that connection by laying him to rest in the very costume that made him a star. It was a fitting tribute to a man who had become so synonymous with the character that fans still visit his grave, paying homage to the Count who never truly died. The cape, a symbol of both his triumph and his typecasting, became his eternal shroud, ensuring that even in the afterlife, Bela Lugosi would forever be Dracula. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra was a man of impeccable style, effortless charm, and a voice that could melt even the coldest hearts. But when Old Blue Eyes was laid to rest in the late 1990s, one item in his casket stood out, a roll of dimes. At first glance, it seemed like an odd choice, but for Sinatra, those dimes carried the weight of a memory he could never shake. In December of 1963, his son, Frank Sinatra Jr., was held for ransom. The ransom negotiations were tense, and Sinatra, desperate to ensure his son's safety, relied on payphones to communicate with the perpetrators. To keep the calls going, he carried a pocket full of dimes. Though his son was eventually returned unharmed, the ordeal left a permanent mark. From that moment on, Sinatra never went anywhere without a roll of dimes, a habit that followed him to his grave. Some say it was a precaution, a way to always be prepared in case of another emergency. Others believe it was a silent tribute to a moment that changed him forever. Either way, those dimes weren't just loose change. They were a haunting reminder of a father's worst nightmare. Walt Disney. Walt Disney built an empire on a mouse, one that nearly slipped through his fingers more times than he cared to count. But in the end, Mickey saved him, and when Disney was laid to rest, he took a quiet tribute to that legacy with him. A simple tie clip shaped like his most famous creation. It wasn't just an accessory, it was a symbol of everything he had fought for. The clip had been a gift from his wife, Lillian, the woman who had stood by him when he was just another struggling animator with big dreams and empty pockets. She had watched him lose Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, his first real success, and she had been there when he sketched a little cartoon mouse on a train ride home, his last shot at survival. That mouse, Mickey, became his salvation, turning Disney from a bankrupt dreamer into an entertainment titan. The tie clip then wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a reminder of the moment everything changed, a token of the character that had saved him from ruin. And even in death, Disney remained tethered to the creation that had defined him. Some say it was a final nod to the mouse that built an empire. Others believe it was his way of keeping Mickey close even as he stepped into the unknown. Clark Gable. Clark Gable was the undisputed king of Hollywood, but even kings have their tragedies. When he was laid to rest in 1960, one item remained by his side, a gold cigarette case gleaming with history and heartache. This wasn't just any accessory, it was a deeply personal gift from Carole Lombard, the great love of his life, the woman who had been stolen from him in a tragic plane crash in 1942. Lombard's sudden death shattered Gable, leaving a wound that never quite healed. The cigarette case, engraved with a private message from her, became his constant companion, a tangible link to the woman he adored. He carried it through war, through film sets, through the lonely years that followed, and when his time came, it was only fitting that the case stayed with him, buried in his casket, ensuring that even in death, a piece of Carole Lombard remained by his side. A silent tribute to a love that defied time, tragedy, and even the grave. Marilyn Monroe. Buried beneath the weight of Hollywood's most enduring tragedies lies a mystery sealed in silk and mahogany, a note never read by the public tucked into Marilyn Monroe's casket. It was small and unassuming, yet carried the weight of a love story that never truly ended. The note, reportedly from her ex-husband Joe DiMaggio, was placed beside her as she was laid to rest in August of the early 1960s. Its contents? A secret that has fueled speculation for decades. Did it hold an apology? A final declaration of love? A promise that even in death she would not be alone? DiMaggio, the baseball legend who had once been her husband, never remarried. Instead, he spent the next 20 years ensuring that fresh roses were placed at her grave 3 times a week, a silent vigil to the woman he never stopped loving. The note buried with her remains an enigma, one last whisper between 2 icons, lost to time but never forgotten. James Dean. James Dean lived fast and he died even faster. At just 24, he was already a Hollywood icon, but his true love wasn't the silver screen, it was the open road. Between film shoots, he could be found tearing up the asphalt in amateur racing circuits, chasing the kind of adrenaline that no movie set could offer. It was this obsession that ultimately sealed his fate. On that fateful day in late September of 1955, Dean was behind the wheel of his Porsche Spyder, a car he had nicknamed Little Bastard. A high-speed collision ended his life in an instant, but one thing remained: a pair of racing goggles, a symbol of the passion that defined him. Those goggles weren't just an accessory. They were a piece of his soul, a reminder of the thrill he lived for. And when he was laid to rest, they went with him, cementing his legacy as Hollywood's ultimate rebel. Even in death, James Dean refused to let go of the speed, the danger, and the freedom that made him who he was. Buster Keaton. Buster Keaton was a man of impeccable timing, both in comedy and in life. When he was laid to rest in the winter of 1966, one item accompanied him into eternity: his signature pork pie hat. It wasn't just a prop, it was an extension of his very identity. That stiff-brimmed, low-crowned hat had been a staple of his silent film career, perched atop his head as he executed death-defying stunts with an expression that never wavered. The great stone face and his hat were inseparable, a visual shorthand for his genius. Keaton reportedly owned dozens of identical pork pie hats, each carefully crafted to maintain its precise shape, but one in particular was chosen for his burial. Some say it was his personal favorite, the one that had endured years of pratfalls and perfectly timed gags. Others believe it was a fresh replica, a quiet nod to the timelessness of his work. Either way, it was a fitting tribute. Even in death, Keaton remained the silent clown, forever framed by the hat that had become his trademark. The pork pie hat's significance stretched beyond mere aesthetics. It represented Keaton's resilience, his ability to spin hardship into art. He had weathered the brutal demands of early Hollywood, survived the transition to talkies, and endured personal and financial struggles, all while keeping his comedic precision razor sharp. That hat had been with him through it all, and in the end, it stayed with him. A final punchline in a career built on impeccable delivery. Jackie Gleason. Jackie Gleason wasn't just a comedian, an actor, or a larger-than-life personality. He was a man who lived with precision, charm, and an unshakable love for the game of pool. So when he was laid to rest, it was only fitting that his most prized possession, his favorite pool cue, went with him. This wasn't just any cue. It was a symbol of his passion, a tool that had seen countless high-stakes games, and a reminder of the role that cemented his legacy: Minnesota Fats and the Hustler. Gleason wasn't just playing a character in that film. He was showcasing his real-life skill, effortlessly holding his own against Paul Newman's Fast Eddie. Off-screen, he was known to challenge friends, colleagues, and even unsuspecting barroom players, always with that same sharp eye and steady hand. The cue, polished and worn from years of play, represented more than just a pastime. It was a testament to a man who approached life like a perfectly executed shot, with precision, confidence, and a little bit of showmanship. In the end, it was the perfect tribute to a man who always knew how to make the break. Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart was buried with a small silver whistle, an unassuming object that carried the weight of a legendary Hollywood romance. It was a gift from Lauren Bacall, his wife and greatest love, referencing their famous exchange in To Have and Have Not. "You know how to whistle, don't you?" Bacall had purred on screen in 1944, sealing their on-set chemistry with a line that would echo through their real lives. The whistle became their private symbol, a token of their devotion. When Bogart passed in early 1957, Bacall ensured that the whistle stayed with him, a silent but powerful tribute to their love. Their relationship had been the stuff of Hollywood myth, an affair that defied scandal, an age gap that melted in the face of undeniable connection. Bacall had once said that marrying Bogart meant putting her career second, but to her he was worth it. The whistle, tucked into his casket, was her final whisper to him, a reminder that their story, though ended, would always be heard. Jean Harlow. Jean Harlow was Hollywood's original blonde bombshell, a woman who seemed untouchable, until tragedy struck. At just 26, she was gone, her life cut short by kidney failure, leaving an industry and millions of fans in shock. But in her final days, as the glitz and glamour faded, Harlow clung to something far more modest than the dazzling gowns and diamond-studded accessories she was known for: a simple pillow. This unassuming object became her last source of comfort as she endured unbearable pain in a hospital bed, far from the bright lights of the silver screen. Her mother, fiercely protective even in death, insisted that the pillow be placed in her casket, ensuring that Harlow would rest as peacefully as possible. The funeral itself was a spectacle, orchestrated by MGM with the kind of grandeur reserved for royalty. Over 250 guests gathered, and an estimated $15,000 worth of flowers blanketed her casket. She was dressed in a gown from Libeled Lady and held a single gardenia in her hand. But beyond the lavish display, it was that pillow, an intimate, deeply personal item, that truly spoke to the fragility of the woman behind the legend. While fans mourned outside the cemetery gates, held back by police and studio security, Harlow was laid to rest with the one thing that had brought her solace in her final moments. A stark contrast to the Hollywood dream she embodied. It was a quiet, human reminder that even the brightest stars seek comfort in the simplest things. John Barrymore. John Barrymore was larger than life, both on and off the stage, but in death he was laid to rest with something deeply personal, his own well-worn copy of Shakespeare's Hamlet. This wasn't just any script. It was filled with his handwritten notes, markings, and the emotional weight of a role that had defined his career. Barrymore's portrayal of Hamlet in the early 1920s was legendary, praised by Orson Welles as the best he had ever seen. To Barrymore, Hamlet was not just a tragic prince, but a living, breathing man. A fencer, an athlete, a soul tormented yet full of vitality. He poured himself into the role, and when he left the stage for Hollywood, he carried Hamlet with him, both figuratively and literally. His family, knowing how much the role meant to him, ensured that his script was placed in his casket, a final tribute to his lifelong devotion to the craft. It was a fitting farewell for a man who had lived for the theater, ensuring that even in death, he would never be without the words that had once made him immortal. Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth wasn't just a baseball legend, he was the game itself. Even in death, he made sure to take a piece of it with him. When the Sultan of Swat was laid to rest in August of 1948, nestled beside him was a baseball signed by his beloved New York Yankees teammates. This wasn't just any ball. It was a symbol of his towering legacy, a reminder of the sport he revolutionized and the brotherhood he cherished. Ruth had kept it as a prized possession, a talisman of the years he spent rewriting baseball history with every swing of his bat. To him, it represented more than just victories and records. It was the heartbeat of the game, the camaraderie of the dugout, the roar of the crowd. And so, as thousands of fans lined the streets to say their final goodbyes, Ruth remained forever connected to the sport that made him an icon. Even in the quiet of eternity, the Babe still held on to baseball, ensuring that his legend would never fade. Theda Bara. When Theda Bara was laid to rest, she remained as enigmatic in death as she had been in life. Draped over her casket was a delicate black lace veil, an unmistakable nod to the persona that had made her a legend. Bara wasn't just an actress. She was Hollywood's first true femme fatale, the original vamp who captivated audiences with her hypnotic gaze and dark, otherworldly beauty. The veil wasn't just a piece of fabric, it was a relic of the silent film era, a symbol of the mystery she cultivated so carefully. It had graced her in several of her most famous films, enhancing the illusion that she was something more than mortal, a creature of allure and danger. Even as the years passed and her films faded from public memory, that veil remained, a final testament to the star who had once ruled silent cinema with an ironclad mystique. In the end, she was buried not just as Theda Bara, but as the eternal vamp forever shrouded in mystery. Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong didn't just play the trumpet, he lived through it. From the smoky clubs of New Orleans to the grand stages of the world, that instrument was an extension of his soul. He revolutionized jazz, turning it from a ragtag street sound into a global art form. And even in death, he refused to part with it. When Armstrong was laid to rest in the summer of 1971, his beloved trumpet was placed in his casket, a final tribute to the instrument that had carried him to immortality. This wasn't just any trumpet, it was a piece of history, a tool that had shaped the very foundation of modern music. Armstrong had owned many trumpets throughout his career, but he treated each one with a near-sacred reverence. He polished them, named them, and even gave them away as gifts to fellow musicians he admired. But this particular trumpet, the one buried with him, was special. Some say it was the one he played during his legendary performances at Carnegie Hall, while others believe it was a personal favorite he had kept close in his later years. Either way, it was more than brass and valves. It was a symbol of an artist who never stopped playing, even as the world changed around him. Armstrong's funeral was a spectacle of grief and celebration, attended by legends of music, film, and politics. But amid the tributes and eulogies, one thing was clear. The man who gave jazz its voice would never truly be silenced. His trumpet, resting beside him, ensured that his music would play on forever. Greta Garbo. Greta Garbo was a woman of silence, both in life and in death. When the Swedish-born screen legend passed away in April of 1990, she left behind a legacy of enigmatic beauty, unparalleled talent, and one final mystery. Buried alongside her in a simple urn at the Scotch Kisko Garden Cemetery in Stockholm was a bundle of personal letters, their contents forever sealed away from curious eyes. No one knows exactly what they contained, but those closest to her believed they held the deepest confessions of a woman who spent her life shrouded in secrecy. Garbo had famously withdrawn from Hollywood at the height of her fame, retreating into a private world where she rarely granted interviews and avoided the public gaze. She never married, never had children, and left behind no memoirs to explain the choices that defined her reclusive existence. Those letters tucked away with her ashes may have been her only true confessions, words never spoken, emotions never shared. Were they love letters, remnants of a long-lost romance? Or were they reflections on the fame she had abandoned, the life she had carefully kept hidden? Some speculate they were written to her closest confidants, while others believe they were letters she had received but never discarded. Whatever their origin, they were important enough for her to take them to the grave. Even in death, Garbo remained an enigma, leaving behind a final unanswered question, one last secret that the world will never know. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin's cane wasn't just a prop, it was an extension of his very soul. That slender, unassuming stick had twirled through the golden age of silent cinema, a constant companion to his beloved tramp character. It was with him in his earliest struggles, when he was just another vaudeville performer trying to make his mark. It stayed with him as he became one of the most recognizable faces in the world, his silent performances speaking louder than words ever could. And when he passed in December of 1977, the cane remained by his side, buried with him in a modest cemetery in Switzerland. It was more than a memento. It was a symbol of everything he had built, a tribute to the character that had defined an era. Even in death, Chaplin and his cane were inseparable, a final bow to a legacy that still shapes cinema today. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford was a master of reinvention, crafting an image of elegance and resilience that masked a difficult past. And nothing symbolized that transformation more than her beloved pearl necklace, a gift from her fourth husband, Alfred Steele. The necklace wasn't just jewelry, it was a talisman. She wore it religiously, from glamorous Hollywood premieres to high-profile interviews, convinced it brought her luck. The pearls, smooth and luminous, were a stark contrast to the hardships of her early life, a reminder of how far she had come from poverty to silver screen royalty. Even in death, Crawford refused to part with them. When she was laid to rest in 1977, the necklace remained with her, nestled against her as if it were a final piece of armor, one last unbreakable link to the legacy she had so carefully built. Some say it was just a sentimental keepsake, but others speculate the pearls represented something deeper: the price of fame, the weight of reinvention, and the cost of never looking back. Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper wasn't just a cowboy on the silver screen. He lived and breathed the American West. His Stetson hat wasn't just a costume. It was a part of him, a symbol of the rugged, honorable men he portrayed. From High Noon to The Westerner, that hat sat atop his head as he defined the very essence of the Hollywood cowboy. When Cooper passed in the early 1960s, his family made sure that legacy remained intact. They placed his beloved Stetson in his casket, ensuring that even in death, he would forever be tied to the frontier spirit he so deeply loved. Off-screen, Cooper owned a ranch, spending his free time riding horses and embracing the quiet solitude of the land. That hat wasn't just a prop. It was a piece of his identity, worn through dust and sun, carrying the weight of his most iconic roles. The decision to bury him with it wasn't just sentimental. It was a final tribute to a man who blurred the lines between Hollywood fantasy and real-life cowboy grit. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.